It was still dark when I pulled into the driveway, my headlights cutting across the stone path I used to race my sister on when we were kids. The front porch light was already on, though. That struck me as strange. My parents were never up before 6, and yet here it was glowing like someone had something to hide. I stepped out of the car, my coat still clinging to the warmth of the heated seats, and reached for the luggage in my trunk. 2 suitcases neatly packed, matching passport holders I'd bought for Mom and Dad, a silk scarf folded between Dad's polos because he always caught chills on planes. I'd spent years saving for this trip. Italy, finally. Not the rushed version tourists settle for, but something crafted: slow mornings in Florence wine in the hills, a boat in Capri. It wasn't just a vacation. It was the apology I had been trying to give them for everything I couldn't fix growing up. I didn't expect the door to open before I knocked, and I certainly didn't expect Lauren to walk out with her suitcase. She had that familiar look on her face, the one she wore when she'd borrowed my sweaters without asking, when she'd told our teachers we had forgotten the project, even though it was only her. The look of someone who assumed forgiveness before the offense was even named. Behind her, Mom followed with a chirpy, "Oh, good you're here," like I wasn't the one who organized every detail. Like I wasn't the one who paid for all of it. My hand didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't speak. I just stood there holding 2 suitcases that suddenly felt very, very misplaced. Lauren breezed by me, pulling a shiny new roller bag that I had definitely never seen before. "You're a lifesaver," she said, not even making eye contact. I really needed this. It took everything in me not to laugh. Not out of humor, but out of disbelief so sharp it left a ringing in my ears. I looked past her at Mom, whose expression flickered just a second too long before settling into cheer. "Sweetheart, Lauren's been having such a hard time lately. You know that. You've always been so strong. We just thought maybe she could use this more right now. We, not you, not I. We." As if it had been some kind of joint decision, a family vote I was never invited to cast. Dad came down the stairs with his usual caution shirt, tucked in too tight belt notched one hole too far in. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes met mine and then looked away like they were trained to retreat. He gave Lauren a gentle pat on the back and handed her a folder, the itinerary I'd printed. My hand still ached from all the scribbled notes in the margins. "I'll drive," I said, finally. No one objected. Of course they wouldn't. Even betrayal needs a ride to the airport. The car ride was silent except for the soft click of the blinker and Lauren's occasional hum, like she was already imagining herself in front of the Trevi fountain. Mom asked if I had remembered to pack snacks. Dad murmured something about the weather in Rome. I didn't answer. I just drove knuckles pale on the steering wheel. At the terminal, I handed them the tickets I'd printed with my own money and didn't say goodbye. Lauren didn't say thank you either. She didn't have to. She thought the world owed her that much. I drove home without turning on the radio. The silence wasn't peaceful. It buzzed. It scraped. It left a taste in my mouth like burnt sugar bitter beneath the surface. I sat in the driveway for 3 full minutes before going inside. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up every reservation, every email, every booking confirmation. One by one, I canceled it all. I didn't slam keys or curse. I didn't text them a warning or leave behind a smug message. I just withdrew. Quietly, precisely, like removing a thread from fabric, undoing the pattern stitch by stitch until nothing was left but empty space. They could land, sure, but they'd have no rooms, no tours, no car service, no special dinners with views of the Colosseum, no prepaid spa day in Tuscany, just their presence and each other. I sat back when it was done. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the good daughter. I felt like something far more powerful. I felt like the architect. When the first call came, I was chopping parsley. Not for anything fancy, just a simple omelet. I let it ring. When the second came, I was rinsing my pan. I let that one ring too. By the third, I didn't even look. But the fourth, that one I watched. The name on the screen was Mom. I stood still, one hand damp from the dishcloth, and stared as it buzzed against the countertop. No voicemail. Just a desperate, unanswered pulse, then silence again. By lunchtime, my inbox was full. The first few messages were polite confusion. Did something happen with the booking? We can't find the shuttle driver. Our room says it hasn't been paid for. Then they turned sharp. Lauren's text came in all caps. My mother's turned guilt-ridden. My father, of course, just asked if I could check on things. I didn't reply. I scrolled through each message with the same detachment I'd once reserved for junk mail. Because that's what it felt like now, spam. Empty, automated pleading with no soul behind the send. I did wonder briefly how long it would take before the reality set in for them. When Lauren realized the hotel wouldn't hold it anyway. When Mom found out the dinner reservation for Giardino Segreto wasn't just lost, it never existed anymore. When they tried to get into the Vatican tour that now belonged to a stranger holding their exact time slot. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in knowing you're not punishing someone. You're just removing yourself, letting the vacuum speak. By late afternoon, the calls slowed. I turned off my phone, not out of spite, but because I didn't want to hear it cry anymore. That evening, I sat in the garden behind my apartment and lit a candle. The breeze was warm for spring. I poured a glass of wine. Nothing special, just something dry and clean. The kind that doesn't pretend to be sweet. I watched the flame flicker against the fence, the shadows dancing like secrets told too late. That's when it really began to sink in. Not just what I had done, but what I had stopped doing. All those years of smoothing things over, of rearranging myself to keep the peace. Of being the bridge everyone walked over but never maintained. The chauffeur, the planner, the invisible engine behind their memories. This wasn't revenge. It was removal. It was revelation. And once you've seen clearly, it's almost impossible to unsee. The next morning, I turned my phone back on just to see what flavor of chaos had fermented overnight. A voicemail from Mom, weary and brittle. We're at the airport. We had to come back early. Your sister is... Well, you'll hear from her. A string of texts from Lauren, all venom. I ruined everything. I was petty. I was jealous. And then the kicker. You made a scene without even being there. Congratulations. I saved that one. Dad sent one final message. Just to picture him standing outside the hotel they'd never checked into suitcase by his feet. No words, just the image. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, like the last breath before a door closes for good. They came home 2 days later. I didn't go over. I didn't call. I just waited. I wanted to see if they would come to me this time, not because they needed something, but because they finally understood. And when the knock came midday, soft but persistent, I knew exactly who it was before I opened the door. Mom stood there first, her hair still holding a shape molded by travel and sleep. Dad behind her, one hand tucked in the other, and Lauren off to the side, arms folded, jaw clenched, still in control of nothing but her resentment. We need to talk, Mom said. I stepped aside, not as an invitation, but as allowance. We sat in the living room where I used to wrap their Christmas gifts for them, where I used to fix Lauren's resumes, where I once cried because I couldn't afford rent and none of them noticed. Now they sat like guests in a house they forgot I built. We didn't mean to hurt you, Mom began, and I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so rehearsed. That phrase didn't mean to had been their shield for years, like intention ever softened the impact. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. Let them pour out their excuses, their confusion, their sudden recognition that maybe I had reached a line. I would no longer let them drag me over. When they were done, I stood. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just with purpose. I looked at them the way a doctor looks at a chart they've already made peace with. Then I said the truth. You made a choice. And so did I. They didn't leave right away. They sat there stunned, like someone had pulled a thread from the tapestry of their lives and left the rest unraveling in slow motion. Mom blinked first, eyes glossy but not quite wet. She reached out, fingertips grazing the coffee table, not me. But we're family, she whispered, like it was a password that should still work. I tilted my head, not cruelly, just enough to let the silence stretch. And family doesn't mean immunity, I replied. Lauren scoffed, loud, sharp, bitter. She always needed to puncture the moment when it wasn't centered around her. "You're so dramatic," she spat. "You could have just told us how you felt instead of pulling whatever this stunt was." I turned to her, then fully letting my gaze rest heavy. "You're right," I said. "I could have told you. But you wouldn't have heard me." She rolled her eyes. That same dismissive flick she used when we were teenagers, and I tried to explain why I didn't want to lend her money again. But even she looked a little smaller this time. Like the ground had shifted beneath her, and she hadn't found her balance yet. Dad hadn't spoken. He rarely did, unless prompted. He was the kind of man who thought silence was wisdom, when really it was just complicity, stitched into politeness. Finally, he said, "We didn't know it mattered this much to you." It wasn't cruel, just clueless. I smiled, small, sad, exact. It always mattered. You just never asked. That was the moment it clicked. Not with Lauren, she was already scanning for her next rebuttal, but with my parents. A flicker in Mom's expression, something like regret, nodded with shame. Dad leaned back, exhaled through his nose. No defense. Just the soft collapse of a wall they didn't realize they'd built brick by brick out of assumptions. I didn't drag the moment out. I didn't monologue. I let the truth hang in the room like the scent of something scorched, undeniable, inescapable. Then I excused myself and left them sitting there. I didn't need to see their exit. That part wasn't for me. I spent the rest of that afternoon in silence, not out of sadness, but satisfaction. The kind that doesn't celebrate pain, but the release from it. I took a long shower. I changed the sheets on my bed. I lit a new candle, clean white linen. I opened the windows and let the breeze cut through every corner they'd ever occupied inside me. That night I wrote in my journal not about them, but about me. I wrote down everything I wanted to do, now that I didn't need to spend my energy managing their expectations. I wrote about a local trail I hadn't hiked yet, a new recipe I wanted to try, and the quiet, thrilling idea of disappearing for a while, not to escape but to expand. The next morning, I did something simple but radical. I cleared out a drawer, one of those cluttered catch-alls that holds other people's forgotten bits, Mom's extra keys, Lauren's old flash drive receipts from meals I paid for and never got thanked. I emptied it, wiped it clean, and left it empty. An empty drawer, it turns out, is a declaration. It says nothing more of "you will live here." That week I started researching new trips, not revenge trips, not look what you missed trips, but something for me, something built not from sacrifice, but from curiosity. I looked at Italy again, but a different version, one that didn't need a tour guide or group photo, one that let me wander, get lost, follow the scent of garlic into alleyways, and sip espresso without checking anyone else's preferences. By Thursday, I'd booked it. A solo journey, 10 days. Florence, Venice, then south. Train slow mornings, bookstores. A room with a view, and no one to tell me when to wake up or where to go next. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends. Not because it was a secret, but because it was mine. Entirely, finally mine. There was a freedom in that silence I hadn't known before. A freedom that didn't require explanation or validation. Just a quiet hum beneath the skin, peace blooming. And just like that, the girl who once drove everyone else to the airport was about to board a plane. For herself. I packed light. Not out of necessity, but intent. A single carry-on filled with linen dresses that didn't need ironing, a well-worn journal, and a novel I wasn't in a hurry to finish. No souvenirs for anyone else. No contingency kits. No just-in-case meds for Mom or extra charger cords for Lauren. Just me, my passport, and the first quiet I'd felt in years. The airport was familiar but different now. I wasn't the facilitator anymore. I wasn't tracking someone else's gait, someone else's needs. I sipped my coffee slowly, not because it was particularly good, it wasn't, but because no one was rushing me. I boarded early window seat, no chatter. Just the soft hiss of air conditioning and the thrum of engines promising distance. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I woke up to a sky so vast and blue it hurt. I looked down at the clouds curled like sleeping giants, and I thought not of the people I left behind, but of the girl who had once begged to be seen. I whispered to her quietly so only I could hear it. You didn't need them to see you. You needed to see yourself. Florence greeted me with sun. Real sun. The kind that warms you through your clothes and lingers on your skin long after it sets. I didn't rush to the landmarks. I wandered. I found a side street with clay-colored walls and ivy that curled like gossip around the windows. I ate pasta with my fingers when no one was looking. I smiled at strangers and didn't flinch when they didn't smile back. I was no longer measuring my worth by reactions. In Venice, I stayed in a tiny room above a bookstore. The owner didn't speak English, and I didn't mind. We communicated in gestures and nods, in the universal language of shared silence. I bought a scarf silk deep green, nothing like the ones I used to wrap for my mother. This one was for me. By the time I reached Naples, I had stopped checking my phone. Not out of defiance, but indifference. I had slipped out of their orbit, and the world hadn't collapsed. In fact, it had opened. One afternoon by the sea, I found myself writing again. Not in the frantic way I used to, trying to make sense of why they didn't protect me, or why I kept returning to be hurt. This time the words came gently. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply recording what it felt like to breathe without tension. That's when the message came. I hadn't planned to check, but I needed directions and flicked on my data. It was a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was soft, almost cracked. I know I've called too many times. I wanted to say thank you for everything, even if I didn't say it when it mattered. Lauren's still upset, but that's not your fault. I see that now. I hope you're safe. I hope you're happy. I hope you know we were wrong. I listened twice, not for the words but the tone. There was no demand, no manipulation, just a hollow echo of recognition. I didn't reply, not yet, not because I wanted to punish her, but because sometimes the most honest response is silence. That evening, I sat along the Arno watching the golden hour stain the river with fire. Around me, the world moved slowly. Lovers bickered in Italian. A child fed pigeons with more joy than precision. Somewhere a violinist played notes I couldn't name but somehow recognized. And I thought, this is what it means to come home to yourself. Not a moment. A series of them. Not a triumph. A return. Not a scene. A silence. And in that stillness, I understood something I had never been allowed to feel fully before I was enough. Without proving, without giving, without being the bridge or the balm, I was simply enough. The next day I woke up before the church bells, the kind of waking that comes not from alarm, but alignment. I stood barefoot on the cold tile floor of the hotel room, staring out the open window. The street below was empty, except for a woman walking her dog, her breath curling into the dawn like a prayer. I watched them until they turned the corner. No one waved, no one saw me, and that anonymity felt holy. I made tea, not coffee. Italy could keep its espressos for now. I craved something slower, something warm without sharpness. I sipped it on the windowsill, legs folded beneath me, wrapped in the same shawl I once brought on family trips to keep others warm. This time it was only for me. The steam curled against my cheek like a whisper. My phone sat untouched on the bedside table. The silence no longer begged to be broken. Around mid-morning, I wandered into a small art exhibit tucked behind a bakery. No signs in English, no tour guide, just canvases and time. I stood in front of one painting for 20 minutes, blue on black, a shape that looked like something trying not to drown. Or maybe trying not to surface. It didn't matter which. I understood it anyway. When I stepped back into the sun, I found a small courtyard cafe. I ordered without hesitation, not to impress or avoid judgment, but because I was learning what I liked. Spinach ravioli with butter and sage, a glass of white wine, bread I tore with my fingers unapologetically. I wrote again, not in a journal this time, but on the back of a receipt. A single line: when you stop translating yourself for others, your native tongue returns. That evening, I watched the sky bruise into dusk from the balcony. I could have stayed inside. I could have scrolled through photos of people I no longer missed. But I didn't. I stayed present. I stayed still. I stayed mine. The next message came from my father. It was short, just a line. I'm sorry we didn't make space for you. No punctuation, no emojis, just raw, almost childlike. I stared at it for a long time, not with anger, but with clarity. I could picture him typing it back, hunched, thumb heavy, the weight of omission pressing down after decades of silence. But here's the thing about apology, it isn't owed response, especially not when it arrives long after the harm has hardened into habit. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. The following morning, I visited a hilltop monastery, not for the religion, for the quiet. I wandered between stone columns, listened to the echo of my own steps, let my breath slow until the noise of the world fell away. There was a nun in the garden trimming rosemary. She smiled at me, not the way people smile when they want something, but the way people do when they recognize a stillness in you they fought hard to earn. I smiled back. No words exchanged. None needed. On the way down the hill, my phone buzzed again. Lauren, this time. You got what you wanted. Hope it was worth it. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside, resentment shaped like righteousness. She still thought silence meant victory. She didn't understand yet that silence, chosen silence, isn't absence. It's autonomy. It's peace that doesn't seek permission. That night, I booked an extra 3 days in Rome, just because I wanted to. No logistics to manage, no one to inform. I reserved a table at a restaurant known for doing one thing extremely well, cacio e pepe. That's it. No menu acrobatics. No need to please every palate. Just something singular, confident, unapologetic. It reminded me of the woman I was becoming. When the food came, I didn't take a photo. I didn't text anyone about it. I ate slowly, letting each bite linger. I drank water between sips of wine. I watched other diners, couples, solo travelers, locals, greeting the waiters by name. Life unfolding indifferent to the past. And that was the gift. Not erasure, not revenge. Just release. I returned home on a Tuesday. The sky was overcast, and the airport felt colder than I remembered, not in temperature, but in tone. I moved through the terminal like a ghost slipping back into a body, weightless yet aware. My apartment hadn't changed, of course, but something inside me had shifted so completely that it felt like stepping into someone else's life, someone I finally recognized. There was a stack of mail, most of it irrelevant. A postcard from an old coworker. A coupon for a grocery store I no longer shopped at. A birthday card from a neighbor who'd forgotten I left town. It made me smile. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window as the city resumed around me, cars, birds, clouds. The same yet different, or maybe just seen differently. The next morning I answered the call. Mom again. Her voice was tentative but stripped of the theatricality she used to wear like perfume. She didn't rush. She didn't beg. She said my name in a way that made me stop stirring my tea. I know I don't have the right, she began, but I wanted to tell you we've been talking, your father and I, about everything. I stayed quiet. She took that as permission to continue. You always did more than we asked. You always showed up, and we never really asked what you wanted in return. We just expected you to keep showing up. There was a pause. I let her sit in it. We're not good at apologies, she added, but I want to try something else. I want to listen. That surprised me. Not the words, but the stillness behind them. The effort to stay on the line without forcing a reaction. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. Okay, I said. Just that. And then I hung up. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed space between the moment and what came next. Later that day, I went through my closet. I boxed up things that didn't fit anymore, not physically, but emotionally. The sweaters I bought to look like someone they'd be proud of. The shoes I wore to family holidays where I'd walk on eggshells. The dresses I picked with my mother's voice in mind. I donated most of it. Kept a few pieces for memory, but no longer for validation. There was a knock on my door that evening. I didn't flinch. I opened it to find Lauren. Alone. Her face was bare. No mascara shield. No defensive smirk. just eyes that looked like they hadn't slept well in days. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside again, not because I owed her the space, but because I had enough strength now to share it without sacrificing any of it. She sat where Mom had, same spot, same sofa, but she curled into it like someone smaller than I remembered. "I hated you for a while," she said plainly. "You made me look stupid and selfish." I raised an eyebrow. "I know," she added. "I was selfish. I just didn't like seeing it in a mirror." I didn't speak. She exhaled. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Canceling everything. I thought you'd cave. You always did." That last line stung more than it should have. Not because it was wrong, but because it had been so right. "But you didn't," she said softer now. "You didn't chase after us. You didn't fix it." And for the first time, I had to sit with the mess I helped create. Another pause. This one longer. "I'm not asking for a reset. I'm just saying I see it now." "I see you?" That was all. She stood before I could respond, gave a half smile, the kind that says maybe next time not, we're fixed. I let her leave. I didn't hug her. I didn't cry. I just stood there watching the door close quietly behind her. Afterward, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt clear. That's the thing no one tells you about boundaries. They don't always roar. Sometimes they just settle like fog over a field, soft but unmoving. And in that clarity, I made myself dinner. Just for one. I didn't speak to anyone for a few days after that. Not out of spite, just preservation. I needed to hear myself think again without their voices filling the pauses. I took long walks with no destination. I stopped wearing my watch. I sat in cafes and people watched, letting other people's stories pass through me like water through fingers. I didn't need to hold anything, not anymore. One afternoon I passed a travel agency downtown. It was small, almost forgotten, with faded posters in the window, Greece, Morocco, Iceland. Places I hadn't yet been. I stood there for a while, just looking. The sun caught my reflection in the glass, and for the first time I saw a woman I didn't want to shrink for. I didn't walk in, not yet, but I filed the feeling away, like a seed. That evening I pulled out an old photo album, the kind my mother used to keep where every vacation was meticulously documented, smiles, matching outfits proof. I flipped through pages of birthdays and beach days and forced poses. There I was, the helper, the organizer, the one behind the cake, never blowing out the candles. I didn't feel sadness. I felt distance. Like looking at a version of myself I had outgrown. A character I had been cast in before I even knew the script. I closed the album and put it back, not out of nostalgia, but closure. The next day I answered my father's call. He didn't say much, just that he missed me, that the house was quiet without my energy, that Lauren had moved out temporarily, that Mom had started taking walks alone. He asked if I wanted to come for dinner. No pressure, just an invitation. I said no. And then gently I added, maybe another time. I could hear the surprise in his breath, like he hadn't expected me to set the pace, like he hadn't realized I was now the one deciding the terms. But he didn't argue. He just said, okay, and that was enough. That weekend I repainted my bedroom. Not because it needed it, but because I did. A deep green, cool, rich quiet. Like a forest after rain. I replaced the curtains, reorganized my shelves, put fresh flowers in a vase I'd forgotten I owned. Every small act felt like a declaration. I'm not waiting for someone else to give me permission to have a beautiful life. On Sunday morning, I went back to the hill near my apartment. The one with the overlook that nobody ever seemed to visit. I brought a thermos of tea and sat with my back against the railing, watching the city stretch awake beneath me. The streets were still, the sky wide. A dog barked in the distance. A cyclist passed humming under his breath. And I thought, this is mine. Not in the way possessions are. In the way peace is. Mine because I earned it. Mine because I stopped begging for it. Mine because I finally stopped offering myself up to people who only ever took the parts they liked and left the rest behind. The next message came from Mom. No guilt, no performance, just a question. If we tried to change not for show, but for real, would you let us show you I didn't answer right away? I let it sit. Some things deserve time, not to punish, but to prove. That's the difference now. I don't rush toward the olive branch, desperate to be held again. I let it grow. If they mean it, it'll root. If not, it'll wither without my water. That night I made a list, not of goals, of non-negotiables. The ways I would no longer be touched, spoken to, forgotten, overridden. A personal constitution. At the top I wrote, I am not responsible for their peace if it cost me mine. Then I went to bed with the window open, and the breeze felt like a lullaby written just for me. A few weeks passed. The quiet became familiar, not empty, but full in a different way. Full of mornings that started slowly without the weight of someone else's urgency. Full of music, I chose meals I cooked for taste, not approval. Full of thoughts I let unfold without interruption. I didn't realize how much of myself I had edited until I stopped. The apologies before opinions, the softened truths, the nods in place of resistance. When you've been trained to keep the peace, it takes time to learn that silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just self-erasure. One morning I received a letter, handwritten, not from Lauren, not from Mom, but from Dad. His script was uneven, he never had good handwriting, but it was unmistakably his. He wrote about the trip, about the moment in the airport when he realized what had happened, and how even then he didn't stop it. I saw your face, he wrote, and I looked away. That's the part I can't forgive myself for. He said he'd been thinking about what kind of father he was, about how often he'd played the quiet role, the mediator, the one who stayed out of it, as if that was ever neutral. You were always the one holding us together. I let you do that. I told myself it was because you were strong, but really it was because I was weak. There was no ask, no request for forgiveness, just a slow unspooling of awareness. At the end he wrote, "We're trying to do better, not to get you back, just because we finally saw what we'd built and how much of it rested on your back." I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal, not because I was ready to act on it, but because it felt like something worth keeping. A small trembling truth, late but real. That evening, I took a walk at dusk. The sky was soft pink, the kind that made everything look touched by something tender. I found myself standing outside a small bookstore I used to pass but never entered. The sign in the window read, "Open late for the quiet ones." So I stepped inside. The air smelled of old paper and wood polish. A man behind the counter nodded once and returned to his book. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers along spines. Fiction, philosophy, cookbooks. A poetry section with a handwritten sign, "For when the heart speaks too softly for your own ears." I picked a collection at random, flipped to a page and read, "You do not owe the fire an explanation for walking through it." I smiled. At home, I began planning again. Not out of duty, but for joy. Not a family trip this time. Not a grand curated itinerary. Just a weekend by the coast. A small cabin, a stack of books, a view of something endless. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I wanted to keep them out, but because I was learning that the sacred doesn't always need to be shared. Some peace is too quiet for words. A few days later, Lauren texted again. Shorter this time. I know I haven't earned a real response, but I'm going to therapy. Not for you, for me. Just thought you should know. I sat with it, then typed one sentence. That's a good beginning, nothing more. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Progress isn't always loud. Sometimes it hums beneath the surface, quiet and steady. I started writing again, not just in journals, but stories. Ones with women like me. Not broken, not bitter, just awake, just done shrinking. And slowly I began letting the people back in, not all at once, and not to the same rooms they used to live in. But I cracked open a window, left the door unlocked, let them knock if they meant it. Because forgiveness doesn't always come with a key. Sometimes it just looks like space, like boundaries shaped with love, like saying I'm here but not where you left me. And if they want to find me again, They'll have to learn how to walk the distance I once crossed alone. It was a Sunday morning when I realized I no longer waited for the phone to ring, that I no longer checked messages with the nervous habit of someone bracing for blame, disguised as concern. The silence wasn't loneliness anymore. It was air, spacious, clear. I stood by the window with a mug of tea watching a child ride a bike down the block. Her father jogged behind her, arms out in case she fell. She didn't. She shrieked with laughter and kept going. I envied that kind of trust once. Now I respected its absence. When you've caught yourself more times than anyone else ever has, you stop mistaking rescue for love. Later that day, I cleaned my kitchen, not because it was dirty, but because it grounded me. The warm water, the smell of lemon soap, the quiet scrape of plates stacking into place. A rhythm, a ritual. Life doesn't have to be loud to feel full. That evening, I sat down and wrote a letter, not one I intended to send. Just words I needed to let live somewhere outside my ribs. Dear Mom, you taught me to keep the peace, to smile through the tension, to serve first, speak last. I don't hate you for that anymore. I think you did the best you could with the tools you had. But I've learned that keeping peace by destroying parts of yourself isn't peace at all. It's erasure. I'm learning how to build something better. I hope someday you build your own version too. Love me. I folded it, placed it in an empty envelope, and tucked it into the back of the drawer I'd once cleared. A space that now held things that belonged to me, and me alone. The next week I took myself to dinner. Alone. Candlelit linen napkin, the kind of place I once thought only couples deserved to enjoy. I brought a book but barely opened it. I was too busy watching people, how they laughed, how they listened, how they touched each other lightly when the wine made them brave. No one looked at me with pity. If anything, the waiter offered me the kind of smile that said, "You know something they don't." Maybe I did. After dessert, I walked home under a sky strung with stars. No music in my ears, just the sound of my own footsteps, and the breeze tugging at my sleeves like a reminder. You're still here, and that matters. At home, there was a message waiting. Another from Mom. This time, she didn't ask for anything. She just said she hoped I was well, that she made my favorite soup the other day and thought of me, that maybe when I was ready I could teach her how to make that pasta dish I once posted. The one from Venice. I read it twice, and then for the first time I didn't feel anger stir. Just quiet curiosity. Not a door thrown open. Just a window cracked enough for air to pass. The next morning I opened a blank page and wrote the title of something new. A story, not about revenge, not even about betrayal, but about a woman who went away and came back. Different. Stronger. Still. The woman I became. I don't need them to understand everything. I don't even need them to say the perfect words. I only need the space to choose what comes next. On my time. On my terms. And if they knock, they'll wait. Not out of punishment. Out of respect. Because once you've built a life out of your own bones, you don't open the door to anyone who arrives empty-handed. Not even family. Especially not family. And that's not cruelty. That's clarity. My sister once took the trip I paid for. Now I take the life I earned. And I don't owe anyone a seat at this table unless they bring something other than appetite. I bring peace. I bring silence. I bring myself. And finally, that is enough.
Thank you all for listening to my story until the very end. I hope that, even just a little, what I've shared can bring something meaningful to you. Goodbye, and see you again.